Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are delighted to have you here. We're grateful for our supporters, our partners, and our sponsors. But most of all, we are grateful that you're here with us today and taking time to join this conversation. You know, we had put out a call a while ago, right after the election, to ask who is interested in learning what should we do during this time. 75 brave people answered that call, and they wanted to know what is going on. What should we do? We promised to host a webinar conversation, except we didn't get what we thought. What happened was, with the exception of the New Hampshire Community Foundation president, no one really raised their hand. All we heard that we needed to brace for impact. No one, even at that time, really anticipated what happened on January 20th. Most presidents signed an average of 216 executive orders during a single term and approximately 328 during a two-term president. Donald Trump, on his first day, signed 26 executive orders. He has signed more than 90 executive orders since that time. These executive orders have reflected a pattern that we heard about last year, a pattern that one of our speakers even wrote about, a mandate that has heavily influenced many of his executive orders, from erasing DEI, dismantling the Department of Education, USAID, reversing and revising the powers of the president, all since he's taken office. There has been so many webinars on Project 2025, which we will discuss today, and Donald Trump's White House. There's been a lot of panic. However, with the exception of a few, maybe MSNBC, CNN, and a few brave Black journalists, the Black perspective has not received a lot of attention. Tonight, we're here to change that. We're here to fill a gap in the panic that is around us, by bringing our perspective to this, a Black perspective to this conversation. There's a lot of fear, but we're not afraid. We know, we have seen this before. This has reminded us, as the song has said, of the past, and really actually asking us to remember the faith that the dark past has taught us. So you may hear worry in our voice, but tonight you're going to hear clear strategies coming forth. We're not going to bring this in a nice little bow at the end like a sitcom, but we are going to talk about clear strategies and what we can do with each other going forward. The question is tonight, what is it we should do? What is the role of funding, supporting, and shaping the future of democracy? To guide you on our journey, we have two wonderful, amazing leaders to start our way. I would like to welcome Janai Nelson. She is the president and Director-Counsel of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, the national's premier civil rights organization, fighting for our justice, everyone's justice, and racial equality. Prior to joining the Legal Defense Fund in June of 2014, she was Associate Dean for Faculty Scholarship and Associate Director of the Ronald H. Brown Center of Civil Rights and Economic Development at St. John's University School of Law, where she was a full professor of law and served on the law school's senior leadership team. She is a renowned scholar of voting rights and election law. She has produced cutting-edge scholarships. She is an amazing leader in this space. Thank you so much, Janai, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
We are delighted. And we have Eric Ward, a nationally recognized expert on relationships between authoritarian movements and hate violence and preserving inclusive democracy. Mr. Ward is the Executive Vice President of Race Forward, formerly the Executive Director of the influential Western State Center and the current chair of the Proteus Fund. He brings over 3 decades of leadership and community organizing and philanthropy to Race Forward, having worked with leaders from governments, law enforcement, business, civil rights groups to advance civil rights work. He is the first U.S. recipient of the Civil Courage Prize, an acknowledgement that, as Ward says, America's dream of achieving a multiracial and inclusive democracy in danger. Thank you so much for joining me, Eric.
Such a pleasure to be with you, Bithiah. Thank you for the invitation.
So, let's get into this. We have a lot to discuss, so let's go. We've heard a lot about Project 2025, this mandate for leadership. I think some of us know what it is. Some of us just know the acronyms. Many of us are just kind of wondering, what is this? So let's get into the foundation of this. And Janai, I think that you being the expert in this area, particularly law, I'd like to lead with you. What is Project 2025?
Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be in conversation with you, especially now that we know what we're facing. I think many of us about what the alternatives might be in the November elections, and many of us, I'm sure, did scenario planning and thought about the outcome in different ways. But we're now faced with one specific outcome, and we're seeing it unfold. We're seeing it in motion and in action. And it really is a very accelerated application of the playbook that is 2025, Project 2025. And it's something that at the Legal Defense Fund we were deeply concerned about when it was initially issued. In fact, we spent our summer digesting that 900-page document and distilling it into a report that said what Project 25 is and translated it to what it meant for Black communities, most importantly. We wanted to make sure that the communities we served understood the literal immediacy of the threat. Project 2025, in essence, is it's billed as a mandate for leadership, but it really is a blueprint that is fueled by a white supremacist vision and seeks to undo the multiracial democracy that we have been building for the last 60 years. And they are attempting to do that by taking away the social safety net, by limiting the ability to challenge some of the lawlessness that we see in this administration, and also to send a chill across the nation in terms of what dissent will be tolerated, in terms of what freedom of speech and expression looks like in this new regime, and what the opportunities for equal access to opportunity, to education, to employment, to economic wealth and success can look like. And it's much more limited in a Project 2025 universe. But I also like to think of it as a clarion call to action for all of us who care about racial justice, who care about equality, who care about the rule of law, who care about civil and human rights and the future of our multiracial democracy. If we needed to have an oppositional document to react to in order to unify us and get us motivated across differences, across the diversity that exists among people who do believe in this multiracial democracy, we have it now. We have it not only in writing, we have it in action. And I'm hoping that our processing of what lies before us and what's already happening will begin to unite us in important ways.
Thank you. You know, Eric, she's said a lot about multiracial, multicultural universe, or this nation, at what's at stake. This is the work that you've done, really looking at multicultural communities and thinking about what's the future like for us if we actually enable that. So from your point of view, and listening to Janai, what do you see as driving this work, and what do you see at stake from your point of view?
Thank you again. And I want to thank Janai and also the NAACP Legal Defense Fund for its work, its clarity and discipline and leadership in this moment will guide us through these trying times. I want to reassert something Janai said that I think is important for us to hold, all of us listening, whether we are Black Americans or whether we are not. This applies. The rule book on Project 2050 exists, and the understanding it is a tool we have in our hands. That opposition that she talks about to 2050 is critical. It brings us together around specific steps that we can take in understanding specific attacks. But it's also important that we unify around the narrative of this moment. And so we're not here just to talk about political storm. We're also here to face the reality of a political narrative. Project 2025 is not chaos. It is a choreographed event, meaning we are not watching incompetence over the last 51 days. It is intentional. And it's not just about who is in office, it's about who gets to have a voice, who gets to belong, and who this country is ultimately for. Let me say this plainly. Project 2025 is not a bunch of random attacks, it is a backlash, a carefully designed response to Black-led democratic progress. This plan, the vision laid out by the Heritage Foundation, embraced by Trump's allies, is the culmination of a decades-long reaction to the victories of the civil rights movement of the 1960s, the election of Barack Obama, the rise of Black Lives Matters, and the national presence of Kamala Harris as a candidate for the presidency. And we need to stop acting like we don't know that. I want to talk about the receipts. The strategy is real. The civil rights movement didn't just integrate lunch counters. It redefined who could belong in this country. Black-led movements secured desegregation, voting rights, public sector jobs. The Voting Rights Act shifted political power. Affirmative action and diversity, equity, and inclusion policies and practices opened educational and professional doors. Immigration reform in 1965 changed who got to call America home. What did the opposition do in response? They developed a Southern strategy. They built think tanks like Heritage, like AEI and Claremont. They packed courts. They gerrymandered maps. They suppressed votes. And now they have written a literal playbook for how to finish the job. And Project 25 is that playbook. It calls for the dismantling of administrative state, eliminating programs that promote diversity, equity, and inclusion, reclassifying and firing tens of thousands of civil servants, many of them Black, stripping federal protections for voting, education, civil rights, and enforcement. They're not hiding it, as I've said, they're publishing it. In just the first 60 days of 2025, we have watched congressional hearings and federal actions dismantling the Department of Education, executive pledges to end birthright citizenship. What I would say, just in short, is if you're looking at who they're targeting, it's not just the Black community, it's everyone connected to that Black community's idea of multiracial inclusive democracy. Educators being purged for teaching Black history, trans people erased through ID laws and criminalization, immigrants and refugees dehumanized, deported, and detained, Jewish Americans blamed, scapegoated, and silenced, unions being attacked, especially in education and public health, veterans, federal workers, activists, and even allies abroad, Canada, Denmark, Iceland, Mexico, threatened or ignored. This is not just a culture war, it's a power war. And at the center of the fight, what I would say is the Black freedom tradition, because the truth is Black progress has always been a trigger. And that is what we're watching happening right now. Not a Trump revolution, but a Trump-led backlash against 60 years of civil rights gains.
You know, Eric, you've brought in a lot of pieces here. And Janai, in these first 60 days, so much has happened. Over 90 executive orders. Can you break some of this down? Like, what have we seen? Education, economics. One of the things that even I was stunned about, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, trying to dismantle even the very information that we get to help shape our government. Break this down for us. What's happening in these key parts of government, and what is it we're really seeing?
Yeah, what we are seeing is something unlike anything we've ever seen before. I'm glad that you started this by putting into context the typical number of executive orders that former presidents have issued and what we're seeing from this administration, the quickness, the sloppiness, the swiftness, the aimlessness. It is all part of a plan to destabilize, to disrupt our notions of normalcy, and to really or subvert, I should say, the processes and the checks and balances that typically attend to actions from the executive branch. Uh, Fortunately, even though we are seeing a record number of executive orders, we're also seeing a record number of lawsuits in response. There are roughly 130 lawsuits that I uh, saw last tally, and many of them, if not most, at this point, are winning in the challenges to stop, pause, enjoin, and slow down the actions of the administration. Unfortunately, that has not stopped them. They continue to create a barrage of orders and to try to legislate by fiat from the White House desk. Just minutes ago, an executive order was released that would reshape our elections entirely. There's a bill that many people have heard about called the SAVE Act, which would, as we know, be very detrimental to Black and Brown communities, to elderly persons, and especially to women, because it requires a name match between your registration and certain federal documents that would now be required for you to show to maintain the registration that you have in order to vote. And so women who change their name when they get married, transgender people who may change their name, and others who simply don't have access to those federal documents would be denied the ability to vote. And this is not a new tactic. This is something that, I litigated almost a decade ago in the state of Texas. And instead of waiting for the legislative process to determine whether that legislation is something that the American people want, the SAVE Act of 2025, which we have been telling everyone to vote no on, it appears that Mr. Trump has issued an executive order that does exactly what that legislation would do, but without going through the process of congressional hearings, whipping the votes, and ensuring that the American public gets to hold their direct representatives accountable. That is just one of many examples of this administration running roughshod over the political process, demeaning the role of Congress, demeaning the role of the people who are meant to hold government accountable, and also attempting to run roughshod over the courts by inundating the court system with this lawless activity, such that it is difficult for courts to not only process some of these cases, but to ensure that every order is being properly enforced. So we are hurtling toward a constitutional crisis if we aren't already there. Depends on your definition. And that is something that we should all be deeply alarmed about. I think if we are to be honest about what we're facing here, we are experiencing a government takeover. This is a coup before our eyes with the veneer of process and the legitimacy of government that truly does not exist because of how this new administration is using the power of government against the people. So you asked about the executive orders. We've seen executive orders from day one range from an attempt to rewrite the 14th Amendment of the Constitution by suggesting that there's no birthright citizenship, which is something that we know emanated from newly emancipated, formerly enslaved Africans, ensuring that their citizenship would be fully respected by government in this country, and that anyone born on this soil is an American citizen. That is a concept that has been beneficial to the United States and part of who we are, part of our national identity since Reconstruction. We also know that there have been executive orders that attempt to rewrite Supreme Court opinions around diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility. The suggestion that the Harvard and UNC decision from now a year and a half ago or 2 years ago somehow is much broader and applies to areas and sectors of our society that had nothing to do with that decision and are far beyond its reach. So there are not only misstatements of law and misstatements of fact, but there's an abuse of executive power to suggest that this is now the law. We see the First Amendment being trampled upon in extraordinarily disturbing ways through the regulation of concepts that people can't even hold the principles and views that diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility are values that they want to pursue in their workplaces or in their educational system or in their philanthropic work, which I know is important to this particular group. So we are seeing this regime use executive powers that were reserved mainly for emergent issues, mainly for acts that are within the scope of authority of the executive, not to subvert the congressional process and not to override the will of the people. And we're seeing that play out in so many ways. And I haven't even mentioned, this so-called Department of Government Efficiency. I haven't even mentioned
Oh, there. We have to.
weaponizing of the Department of Justice and the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security and ICE. So this is an all-out assault from within our borders against the American people. And when you layer, the last thing I will say, when you layer on the rank incompetence of the people who have been confirmed to lead this government, is a recipe for utter disaster for this country.
Janai, I want to stay with you for a moment. I wrote some notes while you were talking. This constitutional crisis. We got to talk about that. This is not good for anyone. We know that we have a very multinational ethnic group on this call. Who thinks they're winning? And how? I mean, the Constitution itself was framed as, we don't want a king. We want a democracy. We people. You've named a whole host of things: abuse of power, rewriting voting rights. Who's winning?
Well, yeah, it's a great question. And I think I'm glad that more and more people are asking that question. We certainly know who's losing, but I don't know that we're focusing enough on who's winning. But I think the answer is really apparent, right? It is not only an elite class of people who are hoarding power, hoarding wealth, but those who also believe that the only way to do so is to take us backwards in time to a moment where there was absolute control by a small minority of people in the country. And rather than working under or at the direction of a mandate from the American people, what this administration is doing is actually elevating and centering the interests of a very small minority of largely billionaires and wannabe billionaires fleecing our government before our eyes in order to control enough power. So by the time people recognize that they've been pickpocketed, it will be too late to do much because all of that power will have been taken from them. Now, the upshot of all of this is that because it's moving so quickly and so recklessly, the some of the primary targets of Project 2025, who are some of the most vulnerable people in our society, and some of the anti-Black racism that animates all of this, was not, surgically targeted toward just the Black community. It has spillover effects that is harming, people of all backgrounds and all races. If we just look at the federal government workforce itself, as Eric said, there is widespread hurt and pain, and yet to be fully appreciated economic consequences from firing, the mass layoffs, the wanton disregard of the value of the federal worker. And then when you add on the assaults on Medicaid and Medicare and Social Security, and what we're seeing, as I said, as an assault on the social safety net, this is something that impacts everyone. And we're not quite prepared to deal with an America where so many Americans will soon become dispossessed, disaffected, and have growing disdain for its government.
This growing disdain is scary, right? We saw a little bit of that January 6th, to be honest. It's scary. We've seen it in all the dystopian movies. It's scary. We have, so we know where the pain points are. We're living this pain. Let's go to some strategies. Let's really talk about what can we do. We've heard conversations rise above it. Why can't we just ignore these things? They're illegal anyway. Or, as I've heard from many people, he's putting it out there, but so few are getting through that, do we really have to worry about it? So the strategy, the ostrich, kind of like putting its head in the sand. Maybe if I ignore it, it'll go away. Eric, I don't know about that. I want to really hear from you. What can we do to release some of this pressure, right? This pressure of fear, this pressure of pain, of ignoring. Where are we going? And what does this mean?
Yes, it's in terms of what it means. So I'm going to answer these questions in reverse.
Okay.
What it means is simply this: that we should hold. The backlash to Reconstruction gave us Jim Crow. The backlash to civil rights gave us Nixon and Reagan. Right? The attack on government, when the question moved from belonging in American society to the question of, could we have a multiracial society that was governed in an inclusive way? Then we saw the backlash to Obama, which gave us Donald Trump, and the backlash to Black Lives Matter has given us Project 2025. The truth is that we need to hold in this moment is that there has been no gain for equity, equality, and opportunity for all in American society in the good times. It comes from the hard times. And the truth is the harder the historical moment, the larger has been the gain. So we should hold hope in this moment. That's first. Two, we have to rid ourselves of the narrative that we have lost the fight. I'm here to tell you, as a person who has monitored and written about authoritarianism in America for 3 decades, the fight has not yet begun. Do not act as if we have lost before the fight has begun. What you are watching, and what Janai pointed out most strategically, is that what we're seeing is the game board is being set. And that game board means further rigging a system, right, that has been unfair and denied opportunity to many in our society. But the other is distraction, right? What we are watching are authoritarians who have laid their hands on the largest treasury in the world. And if you think that they are not looting this treasury while trying to distract us with our fears and anxieties over women, the trans community, immigrants and refugees, activists, students, union members, you are not paying attention to the three-card Monty. And I know all of us on this call have been taken at the carnival or the fairground, right, by the carney who's made us give us our last dollar through distraction. So we have to understand that there are two things happening right now that we have to respond to. The first is the actual looting of America, the storming and the stealing of data from the Social Security Agency wasn't just about incompetence. Trust me, someone has an angle and is seeking to make money off it, and we need to call out the corruption. But the second is we have to stop the dog whistles that are distracting Americans from this rigging of the American system. That means standing up for the most vulnerable in our society. And so I think it looks like this. I think it's important to first pay attention to the stories. In the past month, I've spoken with public school educators in Florida who have had to remove books about Rosa Parks, not because they're inaccurate, but because they make white adults uncomfortable. I spoke to a military veteran in Georgia who told me his daughter, who is trans, was denied gender affirming care in a state hospital. He said to me, I served this country and now I have to watch it abandon my kid. We need to also be angry in this moment, but thoughtful in that anger. So it's twofold. The first is to speak to the growing corruption, right, and the theft of resources for monetary gain by those associated with this administration. The second is to stop the dog whistle politics, the pitting of Muslims against Jews, Blacks against immigrants, this group against that group, and to understand in this moment what we are facing is the question of whether we will secure 75 years of Black civil rights gains or sacrifice it because we do not understand the assignment. Quickly, here's what you can do as an individual, because I think you asked me specific. I want to give some specific advice here. If you're an individual listening to this call and you believe you want to make a difference, the first thing you can do is to be in an organization or a community organization. That could be a political organization or a real estate group or a church or another religious institution, but you have to actively be in an organization. You will not be able to affect change on your own. The second is that you have to focus and find 3 news sources that don't just give you opinion that you like, but that you know are giving you real factual information. If you thought misinformation and disinformation were difficult before this administration, now that it is paired with government agencies, it will become increasingly hard to understand what the basic facts are. And you need to find those sources now. The third is you have to tell your truth, right? But you also have to listen. Practice courageous listening that leads to a shared strategy. This will not be solved in a year. I doubt it will be solved in 10 years. This is a long fight for the battle of the soul of America. And to do that means building a broad base. For institutions, you have a choice right now. You can become a sanctuary for truth, or you become a pipeline for propaganda. right? As an institution, it is your choice point right now. You can practice resilience or you can enforce silence. The third, as an institution, your choice point, you can prepare your people or you can hope it blows over. We need religious institutions doing teach-ins. We need libraries resisting censorship. We need small businesses protecting their workers from political intimidation. And we need educators to teach kids how to think, not what to fear. But none of that happens if the rest of us aren't in organization, if we're not surrounding these institutions. You're no longer in a fight about who belongs in American society. Despite Trumpism, I'm here to tell you that fight was settled in 1968. I am not here to have a 2 out of 3. This is a fight over governance. Will this multiracial America be allowed to govern an inclusive democracy, or will it not? That's the question on the table. That's what we should be building power about, but it does not happen unless we take those first 3 steps.
Janai, Eric said a lot here, and particularly the long fight. Your document came out in October 2024, Black Communities and Project 2025. I think it offered amazing strategies. I thought it offered amazing foresight. You know, when I think about reading that document in October, I thought, wow, this is something, but does it have to be this strong? Reading it again in January, I was amazed, just amazed. So as we're thinking about some of the things that Eric said, I want to figure out from that document and thinking about saving democracy one person at a time. Well, think about how do we have this document help guide us through this time and give us some highlights from that document that we should be thinking about now as institutions, as individuals, as groups, and more importantly, even as our families. And I have one more piece to say as you're formulating this. So if this falls back to states' rights, as they're trying to drive this, right? How are states using your information and your document to ensure democracy and across that aisle to each other?
Yeah, no, those are all fantastic questions. And I just first want to align myself with everything that Eric said. I think the coalition building is so critically important. I think, you know, facing this head on and not, you know, curling up under a blanket is just not the exception. I know many folks were talking about, we're going to sit this one out. You know, we did our part. We're watching America implode. We've never done that. That's not our stock, right? We have always fought for the survival of our people and our democracy and for the American people writ large. And so engaging, as Eric counseled all of us to do, is so critically important. What we did in Project 25, and I hope that you've shared a link or not have to drop a link in the chat about that, is we wanted to not only highlight what the concerns that we had were about Project 2025 and what the massive threats were, but also an alternative vision to think about some of the critical areas of assault. So we knew that they would be, trying to weaken anti-discrimination laws and cutting essential protections for workers. And part of the antidote there is to make sure that people understand the full degree of protection that anti-discrimination laws provide and who the beneficiaries are. And it's a broad array. I like to remind people that one of the very first Title XI cases that the Legal Defense Fund brought back in 1971 was on behalf of a white woman. The case was Phillips versus Martin Marietta Corp., and it involved a challenge to a employer who thought that women who had school-age children should not be working. women who had young children really should be staying at home taking care of them. And we brought this lawsuit and won on behalf of this white woman who was seeking employment to sustain her family and their well-being. And we knew that it would benefit women across all backgrounds to be able to enter the workforce, especially Black women who were, in many instances, important contributors to the financial well-being of their households. And so making sure that as we narrate anti-discrimination laws, as we talk about the benefits of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, we talk about how it has made America better as a whole, how it has been beneficial to underrepresented groups, but to all groups. It's made our workforces better. It's made our productivity higher. It's made our innovation that much stronger. And I think it is important that we tell those stories and we make everyone interested in the protection of anti-discrimination laws. We also know that when we have more diversity in terms of our political representation, we get better outcomes and better results. And as we've seen our representation in Congress and even at the state and local levels diversify over years, we've seen a better quality of legislation, legislation that's been more supportive of working class people, despite the narrative that's out there, that has been better for Americans overall. And that's, again, a story that we need to tell and tell in a different way that resonates. And a big part of that is ensuring that there is Black political power, that people who are often at the margins and who are closest to the problems of our society have the solutions and can propose laws and policies that cut against the grain and can unlock opportunities for everyone in our society. And it's important that we point out examples of that from our past and the vision for our future. So a counter to this executive order that we've seen come out today and to the SAVE Act is the Freedom to Vote Act, is the John R. Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. You know, together those make voting easier for every American. It ensures that we have secure elections, that we have safe elections, that we have election integrity, and we have access to the ballot, which is so critically important for everyone. We know that when we talk about the Department of Education, for example, and that was another executive order that Mr. Trump recently issued to try to dismantle the Department of Education, that harms all children in this country and certainly the future of the country if we don't have an educated citizenry. You know, when we won Brown versus Board of Education back in 1954, the Supreme Court said that education is the foundation of good citizenship. And this administration is seeking to undo our entire public education system. That is a public resource that taxpayers should be able to enjoy and benefit from equally. There are many, many deficiencies in our public education system, but the answer, solution is certainly to outsource that that core societal function to private profit makers, which is what this effort to dismantle the Department of Education is about. And there's so much more. I mean, Project 2025 addresses criminal legal policies, putting the death penalty back into effect, and rolling back some of the progress that we made on public safety and ensuring that we have better and less violent law enforcement. There are issues around affordable housing, and we know that there's a housing crisis, not only in our major metropolitan cities, but across the country, even in rural areas. And that is something that we need to lift up, is under threat under this new regime and the imposition of Project 2025. And then, of course, healthcare, which is something that Americans were able to coalesce around in ways that were unprecedented with the Affordable Care Act, even though it was, you know, a political, hot potato in many ways. Most people, when you explain what the benefits are, they fully embrace the new access to healthcare that they have under the Affordable Care Act and want those protections. And of course, I can't ignore the fact that no matter who you are, frankly, no matter what your wealth background is, we are all facing a climate that is threatening the future existence of this earth and our lives and livelihoods. And so when we talk about environmental racism, we are also talking about the deep impacts of climate change. And when we're seeking solutions to environmental racism, we are making a dent in the overwhelming universal problem of climate change and how it impacts all of us. So making those connections, drawing those dots, and ensuring that people understand that there is a linked fate in this moment, I think is one of the most important things that we can do, because it is isolationism and division that is sown by this administration that will ultimately harm us and allow them to run roughshod over all of us if we don't recognize how linked we are in the harms that are being exacted, and recognize that the only way through this is together.
You know, both of you have raised an issue that I don't think, whether it's philanthropy, education, many of us do not about. When you hear the word civil rights, when people hear that word, they think of Black people, not themselves. And that's a mistake. Civil rights are just that. And this is what I'm taking from you too. Civil rights are just that. Civil, everyone, rights. It helped women, white women, it helped Jewish people, it helped immigrants, it helped white people, Latino people, Asian people, it helped everyone. How do we help everyone understand civil rights is not a Black thing, it's a people thing? We've got to make that shift somehow. And I think that's what I'm hearing you say. I know we only have a few minutes, and believe it or not, there are like 70 questions. And I know that we're not going to get through 70 questions, but one of the things that I keep hearing from a lot of people, who is enforcing or behind these illegal orders, and why? I think people are thinking, again, how is this getting past? What are the elected, what should we be saying to our elected officials? How do we help booster them? What on the individual level can someone do to ensure, whether with their elected officials within their group, what are we doing pointedly? I know first of all, yes, we're distributing your document. I'm sure there are going to be some updates soon based on what happened. But the question is, Janai, three things. Who's doing this, and who should we be doing this to? Many of us, particularly on this call or on this webinar, we are feeling something together. Who's this force we should be fighting? Who's moving this? And within your document, just give us two things an individual can do. They join the group, they're now talking. Where are they going with this?
So that's a great question. Who's doing this? As Eric pointed out earlier, this has been something that's been in the making for decades. This is not new. Um, Frankly, we've been sounding the alarm for many, many years that this is the direction our country was headed in. And as I said, if this is what it takes for us to actually see plainly and to unite around it, it is an unfortunate development, but I would be happy to know that it was a catalyst for change. And I do believe that this extremist blueprint that is 2025, that is set on democracy's demise, does not need to be our destiny. We do have agency here to change the course of this. So in addition to getting engaged and joining organizations, you mentioned earlier that this is in many ways becoming a states' rights issue. Engaging at the state and local level is so critical. So much of our everyday lives is controlled by local and state laws and ordinances and representatives who can opine and legislate on the quality of life that we have. And we should not forget that states are considered laboratory of democracy. They're a place for experimentation. They're a place where we in many ways have much more direct access to power and to influence what our elected representatives can do to make our lives better and to create policies that we believe are in our own image, right? That actually help us live our day-to-day lives better and with the protection that we deserve from the government. Of course, we live in a federal society too, and anything that happens on a national scale and at the federal level is critically important. So I'm not saying we don't lose sight of that. I'm saying it's a both and, that we can walk and chew gum. We can not be so distracted by all of the missives coming out of this administration that we don't also pay attention to local politics. It means getting engaged with your school board. That means voting every single local election, finding who the judges are in your locale, and making sure that you have justice-minded judges who are meting out decisions for those in your community. Those are some of the ways to engage that can actually yield very tangible and meaningful results, and encouraging a new generation to run for office and to be more politically engaged. We cannot lose this next generation in terms of their political engagement. That's what our opponents to equality are counting on. And we cannot afford to let that happen. If that means you're helping someone get the documentation that they need in order to register to vote, then do it. If that means, you're working with someone that they can fill out the passport application and you're paying the passport fee for them so that they can have the documentation that we think should not be necessary but may become necessary, let's be proactive and get that done. Those are some of the ways that we can just get engaged on a human to human level and also on a community level.
Eric, what is your thought? Inspire us as we close here.
Yeah, as we close, let me leave you with this before we go to questions. We have to hold in this moment again, as you open, the letting go of the idea that this is a 30-minute sitcom, meaning things start off nicely, then there's a crisis, then it all gets tied up nicely and neatly at the 30-minute mark. When everyone takes a deep breath, we have been socialized to understand the world and crises in that way. And it is causing harm to the most vulnerable of us, it's causing harm to our communities, and it is causing harm to the idea of an inclusive democracy. Let go of that. The thing that I can tell you, right, is the idea of civil rights led by Black America was a universalist idea, right? It wasn't just about the liberation of Black people. That is what makes the Black-led civil rights movement so unique on the global scale and in the United States. It is one of the few social movements that sought to build a multiracial coalition, including white people, to ensure that everyone, I'll say that again, everyone had the right to live, love, worship, and work free from fear. I say that because I'm very confident that my ancestors did not struggle as hard as they did surviving chattel slavery, Jim Crow, a host of issues. I'm also confident if you are not Black, whatever your background, your ancestors did not put you here and survive the struggles they went through for us to fall down now. Here's what we should know. There is no cavalry coming. There is only us. But I say that not as a statement of fear or despair. That is my declaration of power.
Right.
Every great expansion of American democracy has been led by people just like us, ordinary people who refuse to back down. The Montgomery bus boycott wasn't backed by billionaires. It was led by Black women walking to work. Stonewall wasn't a think tank. It was a riot led by trans folks and drag queens who had nothing left to lose. The civil rights movement didn't start in Washington. It started in church basements, union halls, and small town kitchens. This is our moment to lead from where we are, not tomorrow, not when things get worse, now. So I'll say this, right? To the philanthropist on here, the student, the rabbi, the teacher, the immigrant, the donor, the voter, the neighbor. We are not the ones being rescued. We are the ones doing the rescuing. We are the storm breakers here, and it is time for us to get to work.
Thank you so, so much. Thank you. Janai, thank you for being here with us. Thank you for stretching this couple of minutes. We appreciate what you had to offer, and we really want to thank you from the bottom of our hearts, and good night.
Oh, it's great to be in conversation with you. Thank you so much. This was very rich. Appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you so, so, so much for being here with me. Thank you for your words, your inspirational words. We know the hour is here, and we're going to take you up on that mantle. Thank you so much. Thank you. We have a short survey for each and every one of you that we would like you to take at the end of this program when you click go. And we really want you to take this survey. In the next week or so, we are going to send 2 or 3 clips that you can share on social media about this program, what we said, and actually point back to the entire program. One of the things that we want you to do is to have a conversation with others, to ask them, what did they learn? What are they seeing around them? We ask you to say, hey, I participated in this event, and listen to what people have to say, and then share it with us. Or host an event yourself. If you're hosting an event, I saw someone's hosting something on April 5th in DC, send it to us. We want to get this out to people so that we can start creating communities. We want to know what you're learning. We want to know what you're seeing. We want to know, even if you just had a conversation, let's commit, as was said earlier, to work together. Let's come together to find our strategies, because we are the ones that we have been waiting for. And with that, I would like to say thank you so much to our sponsors who we're listed here, where there's Astor Bar Foundation, Endowment for Health, the Catalyst Fund, Fidelity Charitable Catalyst Fund, Eastern Bank, Patriots Foundation, Kellogg Foundation, Liberty Mutual, TJX, the Greater Cincinnati Foundation, and the Terry and Brad Bloom firm. Thank you so much for supporting us. This work, this conversation would not happen without you. But most of all, thank you to each and every one of you who joined us tonight. Thank you. If you found this interesting, not only can you donate, but also leave comments. That's the most important thing. As we think of our time, talent, treasure, ties, and testimony, the treasure is the least, but it helps us have conversations like this in the future. With that, I would like to say thank you again for joining us this evening. Thank you to our sponsors, but most of all, thank you to each and every one of you, and good night.